Hey everyone, Luke here, and welcome back to the How to Sharpen the series. Today we're actually going to get started into some very basic sharpening. Hopefully you're caught up with the last video, being on basic knife anatomy. That will definitely help in today's video. But today we're going to cover the absolute very basics, stopping and starting on one stone, and adding a little bit of stropping in. This will help segue us into stone progression later on. Um, and definitely stropping is something that we'll get into much more later on, but we'll cover the very basics. Alrighty, everyone, here is a very basic setup, or not super basic. This is one that I've built over the years, but the very basic things that we have here is a source of water. This here is a 1000 grit stone, the stone that we're going to be starting and stopping on today. This is all that anyone really needs to obtain a sharp edge. Something that I want to make very clear is maximizing our gains from one stone will help us actually understand the response that we might get from other stones or what can be achieved with higher grit finishes. A 1000 grit is very well rounded and very practical. This is one that has been soaked. And then one thing before we get into actually sharpening, as far as removing and maintaining an edge, one thing I want to make very clear is making this very flat. Here I have an Atoma plate 400 grit to flatten it. Shouldn't need much. This is one that I've already flattened and I keep very flat. These are my personal stones, so they do not get abused as much. But having a very flat stone is of course going to help us keep a consistent angle, which is going to be very important when it comes to the sharpening aspect. And then I want to make very clear and then talk about categorization. This is sharpening. A lot of times there are different things within knife maintenance world that are confused for sharpening when maybe they are edge maintenance or burnishing and other things to that effect. What we are doing on this case is taking an edge that is somewhat rounded and making it very crisp and creating an apex. An apex is very much a term that we use a lot, and creating a very crisp apex is the key to having a sharp knife. Yep, this is kind of the bread and butter of sharpening. And before we get started, or as we get started, what I will do is take a pass. These are two terms that I've just already mentioned very quickly: apex and a pass. A pass is essentially one repetition of sharpening. Having a point where we stop gives us an opportunity to check our work and our progress. So this pass that I will take is just a rep of sharpening. That I'd like to make very clear is it's very beneficial just because it helps us measure the work that we've done, as well as check and maybe make sure, give us a stopping point to see what may need to be done. So let's get started. I'll take a pass and then I will kind of give some notes here and there, making sure that this is wet. I personally will work from the tip to the heel. There are times that you can work from the heel to the tip, but here we go. Now that is one pass, and some things that I want to make very clear. And because we're starting from the very beginning, essentially one pass for me is sharpening in sections. Each section is where my finger holds pressure. This is something I want to make very clear, is having our fingers over the stone and ensuring that contact, to make sure that we are getting our finish to the edge. Something that's very important and oftentimes overlooked. It's very much the basic as far as where our pressure is. And then leading in from that is maybe how much pressure do we need to put A lot of times I've seen numbers thrown around about around 4 to 6 pounds of pressure. This isn't something that I necessarily ever weighed for myself as far as how much I put. It's very much more just about making the contact. You'll see that different stones can react in different ways, and maybe it might be a bit more detrimental on certain stones as far as how much pressure you put. If you're using the correct grit of stone for the work that needs to be done, letting that stone do the work is the best option. And just being able to run along instead of forcing things to work will be very much more beneficial in the long run for your knife, and as far as also your awareness of what actually you are doing, um, as well as when we're putting that pressure, we are actually only putting pressure on that forward motion because we were pulling that material down and off the edge and creating a burr, another term that I'll get into a little bit more in a second. Pulling that edge off or abrading that material down is going to be, of course, very much better than pulling it up, because you might catch the apex of your knife and just tweak that edge or completely destroy it in the long run. Just a very basic thing that we go to, and I've seen very much sometimes people picking up, and it's doing a forward pass, picking up and going again. And of course, if that's more comfortable, we go with that. If we want to be more efficient, though, staying on the stone and just managing our pressure is something that'll come naturally with time. But yep, very basic. After I've done this pass, kind of checking for what work we're doing, what I want to make very clear is that we're not just checking for the sharpness. We're not kind of trying to abrade. What we are going to do is, because I did work on this side, what I will be forming is called a burr. And a burr is going to be a ring of material that we are removing, and it will sit on the latter side of the apex. Imagine I've done work on this side. It's going to sit right up here on this tip and roll over. There's going to be a little small ring of material. Sometimes it's too small to notice with the bare naked eye. So what we do is feel for it, running our fingers up and checking for that burr. I don't quite have one yet, so I'm going to do one more pass and see where we can get. I'm going to do one more pass back the other way from heel to tip, just to show that it's very actually simple to move in any direction. It is just personal preference. So I'm going to check for that burr, and I can already notice a very gentle one. How strong of a burr you need is kind of somewhat subjective. If you have any burr, that means that you have removed material and created an apex. Whether or not this burr is consistent is kind of dependent on your pressure, but we want to make sure this is consistent. And maybe there might be very large gaps where you don't feel a burr, and you may just need to go sharpen that section just a bit more. Otherwise, if you feel that there's just splotchiness and maybe some parts that aren't as strong as others, here's one thing that I recommend, and that is doing a full sweeping stroke or a stropping stroke, running from tip to heel, just trying to get all the bullet burr to roll over consistently. And this is one where I will slowly work my hands down, but the pressure should get this burr to roll over and be more consistent. This is going to be the dominant hand of sharpening. Now that I've created a burr, we can move on to the backside. This here is going to be oftentimes where a lot of things change. Some people, because a lot of people are right-handed or left-handed, can sharpen this way and ambidextrously. And we're just repeating the same process. Although there are many ways to do this side, and oftentimes this can be very uncomfortable, If sharpening in general is going to be uncomfortable for you, I'd recommend trying to do this ambidextrously and see how you can do on the other side. Otherwise, we can sharpen instead on the pull motion and flip it up, use our dominant side, and work this way. Already got a burr there. That's just one way. Otherwise, kind of newer one that I've seen done is moving in this way and sharpening on the pull. This is an interesting technique to make sure that our scratches are going the same direction and mirroring each other, just because when I sharpen, our scratches are going to form going down to the heel. And if I were to sharpen like this, they're going to go from the heel up to the tip. Doing this way ensures that both on the apex, the scratches are going in the same direction. Small tweak and small detail. As far as what's needed, it's honestly always about what you are comfortable with doing and being safe in that way. Otherwise, now that we have achieved a burr on both sides, this burr will still sit here, and what we will do are now stropping strokes on either side, alternating to help try to get this burr to fall off. So I'm going to start doing that here. Now this step is very light in pressure, and we are spreading our hands out, trying to maximize the contact of the apex. Just trying to get this stone to hug that apex and very gently roll it off. We're not really removing much material, although it will happen naturally because this is an abrasive. But this burr has gotten much smaller and much less notable. Now, this burr is actually now sitting on neither side. Maybe some of it has fallen off, but it's probably sitting right here on this apex. So now we have one step, which is stropping. This is going to help remove this burr entirely and get a clean apex. And I always like to, maybe if someone's getting into sharpen and doesn't know the full extent of what stropping can do, as far as burr removal, and also because there are serrations sitting on the face of this apex, stropping can help tuck those in and just make it very clean in general. I will always recommend for people maybe trying to cut paper, or they like that as the test, is to cut some paper before stropping. And you'll hear maybe how loud it might be or how you might catch in certain spots. Of course, catching can be due to inconsistent sharpening and other aspects, but definitely try cutting paper, seeing the reaction that might come from that, whether or not it be loud or if it catches, and then strop and see if your differences change. That'll definitely tell whether or not it's just stropping that you needed or if there's more stone work to be done. So let's clean this knife up a little bit and then go for a strop. Just wiping this down. Definitely would be better to wash, but we will go from here. Now, if you've seen one of my earlier videos, this is a strop that you've seen before. It's definitely a little dirty, needs to be cleaned up. This is a cork-based strop with a diamond slurry compound added to it to help pull more material off. Stropping can come in many forms, whether or not it's just brushing it on newspaper to help pull that off. And kind of in that demonstration I mentioned before, as far as cutting paper and seeing the difference, even cutting paper can remove that burr. As far as tucking in those serrations, that's definitely something that a strop is more useful for. And stropping can come in many forms, like I mentioned in one of my previous shorts. But otherwise, let's go in and test and see exactly what this edge does for us. I've got here some wax paper. Newspaper or any paper works great as far as general tests. Some papers, of course, are harder than others to cut. But as you can see, just from a 1000 grit finish, this guy is very toothy, has a nice bite to it. Of course, results may always vary person to person and depending on the knife. Don't ever get discouraged and just look for the subtle cues and understand the small differences. We can always discuss more of these later on. But as far as the next video, as far as the how to sharpen series, next we're going to talk about progressing our finish, maybe moving up to a 4000 grit finish or possibly as high as an 8000. What comes in between that and what comes afterwards. But hopefully with this video, you're able to achieve a great 1000 grit finish edge. And I definitely always recommend practicing with this and understanding the very basics that come from a 1000 grit finish. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully you'll tune in to the next videos.